I had a different conversation planned for you all tonight, or at least a different talk initially, and found that I couldn't come and stand here, particularly in Chicago, a place I still think of as a second home, without having some conversation about where we are politically. I will warn you, as is common with me, what I'm going to say may not be popular. That's okay, because then we have two fabulous panels and you'll forget all about it before Q&A and won't be angry. Just kidding. Speed is our theme, and I've been running a program for nearly a year called Wake the Vote. It's a group of 30 students at Wake Forest University. 30 students in Wake the Vote. They are Democrats and Republicans. Some of them started as unaffiliated. We went first to Iowa, then to New Hampshire, then to both the South Carolina Republican and Democratic primaries, then to the North Carolina primary. Then we went this summer to Cleveland, to the RNC. Then we got on a bus and drove to Philadelphia, to the DNC. Then this whole fall, they've been working for candidates and issues that they care about. 4 in particular: immigration, education, gun violence and policing, and youth voter participation. I'm so proud of these young people, and we've worked so hard and we've gone through so much that we threw a huge event on Tuesday night. An event that I like to think was probably the only bipartisan election watch party in the country. We were outside on the lawn, we had the big jumbotrons, we had live bands and DJs. It has been a long road that sometimes felt very slow, and then suddenly speed. The speed with which the students saw the Electoral College votes change, the speed with which their expectations shifted. And remember, these are Democrat and Republican students. But I couldn't come and talk about speed without talking about how much whiplash many of us feel in this moment. And I think it's a whiplash that didn't have to be, because I actually think the result was terribly predictable. Not on some of the things people think, but simply because of what we could have known if we'd asked the right questions of the right people. But that part of what happened is our media silos kept us from being able to know those things, and as a result, all of us are feeling, I think, anxiety related to speed. So I'm gonna go faster and walk you through what I think some of that speed is connected to, end on a question around guns, and then bring in my panels. This was election night 2016. You know, the South generally does its own thing, but the extent to which the solidness of the South and the far and the West came in on that night, and then also Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Something this big actually ought to be visible. We shouldn't have to be in a situation of speed, but we were. And so since we were in a situation of speed, all of the claims that had to get made that moment in that night were what I like to call speed claims, fast claims, the ones we think we know at the tip of our tongue. So let's just start with this one. The Donald Trump's win is intolerable for American women. I write for a fashion magazine website. It's really fun. They don't call themselves a fashion magazine, they call themselves a women's magazine. And in fact, it's turned out that that's been true, that probably the most progressive work I've ever had an opportunity to do, I'm doing on a site that also has a lot of clicks about Brangelina's divorce. I've been fighting with my editors during the entire election because they were very strong Hillary supporters, and in being Hillary supporters, also truly believed that she was highly likely to win the election. I had not thought she was likely to win the election. Many of my pieces had some editing challenges. One of the reasons I believe that the women's discursive space was having trouble with seeing what was happening was because of this belief that Donald Trump's win is intolerable for American women. And I mean, he kept doing and saying things, or we were finding out about him doing and saying things that clearly make it feel like it's an intolerable win for American women. These were the images that we saw over and over and over again on election night. And things like this. Really, as a parent, what do you do today? I want to buy into the evolved mindset, the various no leaving America and work to do and fight for love sentiments, but I'm still angry. And I'm not ready to come together. I'm so angry to know unequivocally that half the people in this country signed off on bigotry and cruelty last night, and that there's no way to prevent my children from interacting with those people as they grow up here. Let me just say I have enormous empathy for this position. But let me just slow down the claim for a second. Because while I have enormous empathy for the feeling of what am I going to tell my children, I must ask you, what the hell have you been telling your children? At what point did it become intolerable for us to think about young people having to grow up next to other people who they are going to have to interact with, who may at any point cause them physical, emotional, psychic, personal harm unto the death? Because quite honestly, that's like Tuesday for me. Like any Tuesday, not just election Tuesday. Every single time a black woman who is a mother tries to rent an apartment or buy a house or send her kid to a public school that her tax dollars pay for, she has to ask that same question. When you're staring down the barrel of your kid's formative years coinciding with the Trump presidency or, the Reagan presidency I grew up under. I get it. But I want to just remind us the ways in which it's so easy to erase and fail to remember that this is not some brand new thing. And I'm telling you this not to harangue you, but hopefully to give you hope about the fact that this is not a brand new situation. It was Mamie Till Mobley right here in Chicago who opens that casket and says, "Look on this lynched body of my son, Emmett." And she says, "Look on this lynched body of my son, Emmett," because she believes that if you see his broken and bloated and destroyed 14-year-old body, that you as Americans will make different choices. She launches the civil rights movement in many ways with this choice. But I want to, we often see the picture of Emmett. We often even see back this picture of Mamie Till's grief, but we don't talk as much about this one. Do you know who this is? These are the men who lynched Emmett and their wives. This is them standing in the courtroom after they have been found not guilty by an all-white jury in Mississippi. This is, for me, the hardest visual image of the Till lynchings and story. And it's the hardest one because those women have children. Because those women are mothers, and because one of those women knew that she was lying about what Emmett did when she asked her husband in that moment to kill that child for her. If you know their story, you know that she was, you can see her there on my right, yes? She's beautiful. She was kind of the beauty queen in high school. She married an older guy. And their deal had been that she'd raise the kids. But he had her working behind the counter at the store that they own. She hated it. She wanted to be home. She felt vulnerable. She told him that this boy visiting from Chicago whistled at her. Speed, in the blink of an eye, Emmett is dead. She is restored to her place, caring for her own children. And this is them responding to the not guilty verdict. So I wonder if we could slow down our speed claim that something happened on Tuesday night that is fully intolerable for American women, something so intolerable that we, quote, don't know what to tell our children. I keep wanting to ask you again, just what have you been telling your children? Because when the Zimmerman verdict was released, 54% of non-Hispanic whites believed that that was the right verdict, whereas 85% of African Americans thought it was wrong. Let me just suggest, if you were thinking that what just happened on Tuesday was the first time parents were having a hard time explaining to their kids not only the outcome of a thing, but the fact that their neighbors thought that outcome was okay. Some of us, this is not new territory. So I'm wondering when it is we think that violence against women exactly became so intolerable. The American media lost its absolute ever-loving mind about a multi-year-old tape in which a man says he grabs pussy. I assume it's because he used the word pussy, and we hate all things related to women's sexual organs. If you don't believe me, go over to the Walgreens and see the whole aisle for washing it, as though it were dirty. Meanwhile, no, nary, not one special product for testicles. And I'm telling you, if there is a body part that could use a special deodorizing, but women we hate. And so we hate our bodies and we want them to be as small as possible. You should never mention vaginas. And let me tell you what happens if you put two clean pieces of cotton in your ears, two pieces of cotton that have never been anything but two pieces of cotton, but were intended by their manufacturer to go in a vagina for a menstrual cycle. In other words, if you wear a tampon as an earring, as I did on MSNBC, 3 or 4 years ago, in order to protest the fact that the Texas legislature would not allow women to bring tampons in to the state legislative building while they were protesting the reproductive injustices occurring on the floor there. They wouldn't allow women to bring the tampons in because they said they could be hurled at the legislators. It is so obviously patently ridiculous that I made earrings out of them and said, hey, ladies, if you can't carry them in your, because they're searching your purse, wear them as earrings. If I so much as go on social media today and say the sky is blue, someone will be certain to respond to that statement about tampon earrings. Because what you must understand is if you wear tampons, you are not to be taken seriously. So we hate women's bodies. And so the idea that the word pussy was used is far more upsetting to us than, what people actually did. Because while the media was losing its mind about a comment about pussies, Daniel Holtzclaw had been raping black women in his position as police officer for years. And his trial, one of the few and precious wins in the entire movement for Black lives, and yet you probably barely know anything about it because almost no media organization covered it. But now it's intolerable to talk about pussy grabbing. I don't want you to say her name. I don't want you to know her name. I only want you to know that she was 13 years old, that her mother was dead, that she was in foster care, and that this is how our school resource officers behave towards her. When exactly did violence against women become intolerable? Tuesday night? Because I think you'll notice right here in the election results, and the reason that I've been predicting this outcome for more than a year is because there is no gender gap. And I will say it to you again, and I encourage you to say it to your friends. There is no gender gap in American partisan politics. Women do not vote for the Democratic Party. Black women vote for the Democratic Party. Women who are always defined and described and understood within American media as white women without having to say the word white, but when people just say women, they always mean white women. So when you hear the analysis, women's votes went to Barack Obama, that's a lie. When you hear women's votes went to Hillary Clinton, that's a lie. Black women's votes did. White women in this election, as they have in every election for more than 30 years, supported the Republican candidate. Now I'm down. Do your thing, girls. Because people tend to vote to protect their children. And so we know from the Mamie Till Mobley, Joy Bryant story, whose children are being protected under what circumstances. What I'm not okay with is the Democratic Party seeming to believe that suddenly a pussy-grabbing comment was gonna shift this reality in American politics. This is a durable result. This is not a speed claim. This is not a surprise. This is pretty much, Tuesday. The one thing that is fascinating is the black men. We could have a talk with them. But also not terribly surprising. And also not our fault. Speed claim. Donald Trump's win is going to cause an intolerable race crime link. Well, you guys already probably know where I'm going at this point. These are some of the language that Trump used. He said the main victims of these riots are law-abiding African-American cities living in these neighborhoods. It's their jobs, their homes, their schools, communities, which will suffer. There's no compassion in tolerating lawless conduct. Because law and order is always the most important thing. Even in the conversations about what happened in terms of protests, whether we're talking about Ferguson or whether we're talking about Chicago, the language of the protest turned violent, always what that means is property crime. They turned violent means something got burned, usually something insured. The notion that there is violence that is done to property, as though such a thing is even reasonable, is exactly why so many of my neighbors ended up on the roof of their homes in Katrina, because we thought that constituted violence. People going and getting, stuff. I think media ought not ever be allowed to use the word violence unless we are talking about, a human or an animal or a sentient being of some kind. Even if I fuck up the whole block, it ain't violent. It's just, rude. I'm not suggesting it's okay. I'm suggesting it's a different category of thing. I'm suggesting the language we use ought to be different. But it turns out he wasn't completely wrong, in that it does look like African American men went to their traditional standard norms of percentages. And I just want to ask that same question, though. Exactly when did this race crime link become intolerable? Because just like that conversation I just had about the Zimmerman verdict, so too in the Ferguson decision, there are enormous racial gaps. 58% of white Americans thinking that the decision to not indict was correct, whereas 85% of African Americans think it's not. And then on the question of civil rights charges, 85% of African Americans saying they approve with bringing civil rights charges, while just over a third of their white neighbors agree with them. So when exactly did this become so intolerable? Because you'll remember those pictures I just showed you, from Rekia Boyd to Maya Hall. And yet somehow, in this period where we shot a boy who was walking home with his hoodie up, and where we killed a 12-year-old on a playground, and where we did these things and never brought any kind of justice, nonetheless, at the height of that, 1 month after Tamir Rice's killing, white Americans demonstrated the highest on record confidence in local police. So when did this race crime link become intolerable? October 12, 1994, President Clinton announces the new crime bill to put police officers on the beat. The grants announced help jurisdictions hire 2,770 new officers. I'll tell you this, I actually believe, despite all the anxiety, I actually believe President Clinton in that moment and the others who supported this bill believed that this would make Black communities safer. In very much the same language we just heard from Donald Trump about lawlessness and about who was most impacted and affected by it. I believe in 1994 that they believed that. Put more officers on the street, it will make things better. I get it. I think we're going to have to be able to be wrong as policymakers. Hell, I'm wrong all the time. It's okay. We can be wrong and learn. I don't hold this as a moment against anyone. I hold it as a learning curve. But if we don't learn from it, Mr. de Blasio, if we continue to think, even in this moment, that putting more officers on the street is the thing that will make Black communities safer, then we are making speed claims instead of slowing down enough to actually assess the evidence. All of these individuals were killed in either North Carolina, South Carolina, or Virginia in the past 3 years by police officers. The youngest person on that set of windows is 16. The oldest person is 73. This is the window in one of my offices. The Wake the Vote students put this exhibit up. So they could not vote. And yet, again, when we look at who did vote, for those who believe that the criminal justice system treats everybody equally, 74% of them chose Mr. Trump. So that belief is connected to this outcome. This is a predictable outcome. Final thing, Donald Trump's win is uniquely dangerous. In part because we kept hearing things like, we can't have a racist be the president of America. Look, I much prefer to live in a country without a president who is openly, virulently racist. Sure. But I would like to know when racism became a disqualification for the American presidency. Because for most of American history, including current American history, it's actually been a prerequisite. And I even understand, because I'm speaking specifically about Black folks, but I don't want to miss the ways in which his presidency may in fact be uniquely dangerous, particularly for undocumented communities, some of whom are Black folks too, at that intersection. But I just don't want us to miss either that Jay Johnson has been knocking on doors and dragging out people's mothers, and that the president and the Department of Justice, even as they are doing critically important work of reducing the prison population that is our domestic federal prison population, have not done so relative to the incarceration of men, women, and children whose only crime is a status crime of being in the wrong, let's think of it another way, of being across the wrong boundary, like Jim Crow, a status crime, sitting at the wrong lunch counters, drinking from the wrong water fountains, going to the wrong schools. We actually incarcerate those kids right now using the same private prison system with the same set of profit incentives, literally the same companies as we are dismantling on the domestic side. So I feel you on it feels like it is uniquely dangerous, but let me just say it ain't particularly safe right now. So I would like us to slow down our speed claim, to ask when this unique danger began. We make a choice to allow nearly 4,000 people to have been shot in this city. That's a choice. It's a choice based on our availability of guns. I'm wondering again, when did it become uniquely dangerous?
Because the Chicago Police Accountability Task Force, in its own data, demonstrate this belief. I didn't make this up. I didn't write this sentence. This is from the task force report. About a widely held belief that police have no regard for the sanctity of life when it comes to people of color. So I understand you're losing sleep. I get it. I just wonder why Tuesday was the moment when you started losing sleep. And so I want us to ask, in this moment when we're making our speed claims, and I'm encouraging us to begin to slow down. We must act. I know everybody wants to act. A little worried that if you do all the protests before the man is even inaugurated, I'm not saying we're not going to protest. I'm saying as of right now, there is no reason to think this man stole the election. I think he just earned it. I actually think it was highly predictable. There's some people you want to protest for how bad you feel. Can I tell you where Rockefeller Center is? Because part of the reason you feel so bad is because no one bothered to actually do any of the analysis that would have made it at least less surprising. Because it's not surprising. It's actually widely and easily available if you slow down. And I do want you to talk about what's intolerable, but I want you to talk about it at all points, not just when it's sensational. And so I am now going to invite up some guests who are going to talk about our more durable moments of the intolerable. So let's have our first speaker. We have, of course, you already know, Congresswoman Robin Kelly. Still, thank goodness, representing the 2nd District and co-chair of the Congressional Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, Colleen Daly. Colleen is the Executive Director of State and Federal Policy at the Illinois Council Against Gun Violence. And then finally, Daryl Holliday. I hope you have read Daryl's writing and work. He's editorial director of City Bureau, which is, of course, a civic media lab, and did other roles within journalism prior to that. Congresswoman Kelly, I want to start with you. When you look at this election and its results, what do you think the likely outcomes are going to be for this issue that you care so much about, around the question of getting some kind of common sense protection around guns?
Well, it's hard not to have a dismal way of looking at things. My only hope is that we did gain 2 seats in the Senate, and they need, before we had this many, or the 2 seats, I think the gun violence background check was 1 person short. So that gives me some hope, but really I have to see who gets appointed, who's the new people in leadership and all of that before I could really make an educated guess. In the House, it's not that we don't have the sponsorships, it's a bipartisan bill, but the leadership, first Boehner and then Speaker Ryan, just wouldn't call the bill to the floor. It's not that we don't have we have 190 co-sponsors bipartisan. They just won't call the bill.
So it's interesting. I want to stay on this for just 1 second, because much of what's happening there is actually connects with what happened in the election, where you may actually have had more people, not necessarily more voters, but more people who were supportive of Secretary Clinton, but the intensity of their support was relatively lower. Whereas fewer people may have supported Mr. Trump, but they really were extremely intense about it. And so that intensity made sure they got to the polls, it made sure that they cast their votes, even if the ground game wasn't as good, right? There was that kind of intensity. So you end up with something similar around guns. A majority of Americans saying, we want background checks, we want, common sense rules, but the sliver that wants AR-15s and everything else available, to my 14-year-old, are so intense and well-resourced.
Right, 90% of Americans want background checks, about 73% of NRA members. But the difference is the people that want gun safety or gun reform, they're not one issue people. The folks that want, all hell to be loose when it comes to guns, they're one issue people. They've interviewed people that said they're just with Trump because they know that he'll be, for lack of a better term, pro-gun or won't change things. And we're not quite like that.
So Daryl, what are we getting wrong or missing, or what else should we be adding into our conversation as we're talking about both gun violence and gun policy? If we were to slow it down a little, what would that reporting look like?
I think it's important, for one, that we interrogate our assumptions about what crime reporting is, especially in regard to who it's for, who's harmed, and who benefits. I think this kind of relentless pursuit of gun violence stories, it's manufactured, I think, for one. I'm not convinced that it's keeping up with public demand.
So let me push and dig on that a little bit, because I think people might think, well, of course it is. People need to know. And so let me just back up and connect back to one of the reasons I had Emmett Till there was, Mamie Till Mobley's belief that showing his broken body would have a political impact. A very different kind of crime reporting, right? Because lynching was going unreported. So the idea that we have to, basically she was a citizen reporter who revealed lynching. It is not, and it did begin to change things. I mean, it initiated a movement that changed things. Not like it changed the legislators, but it initiated a movement that changed things, or amplified a movement that changed things. But we've seen Tamir and Rakia and Sandra. I feel like we see broken black bodies all the time now. Are those numbers, 3,000, 4,000, even just this person, this person, this person, are they no longer having the Mobley effect? Do they no longer move us?
I think they do move us, but the fact remains that at the foundation, communities are much more complex than these portrayals of damage. These are important topics and worth covering, clearly, but when we have this sort of flyover parachute journalism that just dips in, maybe pulls some tweets, a video, but doesn't return to see how a community is rebuilding, or the strength. I think that's what's really missing from this kind of coverage.
So, Colleen, when I look at numbers like that, and I think 3,000 shootings, having just moved from New Orleans, where our murder rate was so extraordinarily high around guns. But this is a city that has good laws. So should that be correlational evidence to me that the laws don't matter?
This is a question I get all the time. I think.
Oh, I hate that. I hate asking the question everybody always asks.
Well, it's because we're in Chicago. Of course, that's what we hear. And everyone wants to point to Chicago. You've got the best gun laws in the country, so why is the violence so high? I looked to a report from the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence that graded all the states. Illinois is surrounded by states. One with the highest average is a C-. When we look at where guns come from, 60% of guns used in crimes in the streets of the city of Chicago come from outside of Illinois, mainly from states like Mississippi and Indiana right next door. 40% come from here, but the rest come from outside of here. So it's not our gun laws that are the problem, it's our surrounding states' gun laws that are the problem.
It is this fascinating idea, Congresswoman, that the idea that what we need to do is build a wall against human beings who are migrating back and forth across borders, primarily contributing, by the way, to the solvency of the Social Security system. That's an empirical reality, not an opinion. But we don't want to build a wall against a product moving back and forth across state lines that has this kind of result.
Right, we need national gun trafficking laws. We need national straw purchasing laws. And people say, well, you already have all these laws on the books. But I had a meeting with my police chiefs out of Chicago, because 2/3 of my district is out of Chicago, and the FBI. And the FBI said they just slap people on the hands because the laws are, you know, quite imperfect, and it is a slap on the hand, so they have more important things to do. You know, it's not worth it, and it won't stop anything. So that's how we need the national laws in place. And like Colleen, I hear that all the time. Chicago, when I go back to DC, you have such strict laws, but if no one else around you has strict laws, it doesn't matter. And one of the worst offenders is actually in my district, the gun shop.
And yet, Colleen, I will say, I'm from the South, live in the South now. I'm a gun owner. And my father, on election night, as everything was crumbling from the perspective of Democrats, as everything was falling apart, my dad literally sent an email to the family. There's like 15 of us. And the email said, hey, getting ready for our biannual Thanksgiving dinner and hunt. And, you know, we'll meet here and we'll do this. And I, you know, my dad grew up in the Jim Crow South. He was college roommates with Stokely Carmichael. He didn't send me any communications about the election, but he did send this wide blast email about let's all go hunting, which I presumed was like an actual subtweet of the whole election. Like, these Negroes have guns, don't come over here, which is kind of how my dad responds to moments like this. Love my dad. I'm wondering, given that we know that people own guns, given that we know that that is not going to change, if the laws, instead of being directed at gun ownership, should be directed at gun production, that a gun should be just a safer thing to have. Like, my car is safer now than it was in the 70s. And not that there shouldn't be any regulations, but I'm wondering if there's another way to go at this.
Well, from a state perspective, because that's what we do work on, and I think Robin could address CDC stuff and national things that we need done. But right now in Illinois, we're trying to license gun dealers. They are licensed by the federal government. But the problem is the average gun store is visited by ATF once every 10 years. And before they actually come out to the gun store, they have to announce themselves. So I equate that to, you know, you're in high school and your parents are out of town, you're having a party, they call you 5 hours ahead of time and say, hey, we're coming home. You can clean everything up and kick everybody out. The gun store Robin was talking about, Chuck's Gun Shop, in a 4-year period of time, over 1,500 guns were found in the streets of the city of Chicago. There's something wrong there. But right now, the state of Illinois can't do anything to go after that gun store and hold them accountable. So that's one of the things we're trying to do here in the state.
The other thing is smart technology, and this was developed a long, long time ago, Smith & Wesson, but then they essentially were blackballed for putting out smart technology, so they stopped making those types of guns. But we have the technology for everything. We have the technology for that too, or doing something with the bullets so you can trace the bullets back. But again, won't be able to get that called in Congress.
So Daryl, let me go to you on the resilience thing within this, because on the one hand, it feels like there are policies that could happen. There is some will for it. But I just made a pretty strong claim over and against the media relative to this election. I could make an even stronger one, but I'm going to try to not. How ought the media be engaging? Are there different ways to be reporting that could potentially alter how we're thinking about this? So I hear you talking about resilience, but I wonder, for example, like as I would watch the mothers of the movement, they even came, they stood in that room with that black and white wall with the "they can't vote." Sabrina Fulton had a lot to say to me about it. I both am in awe of those women, but also worry that it makes us think that, like, it's ordinary for black women to expect to lose their children. That, you know, oh, now you're a part of this club. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, I covered homicide crime here for 3 years. I know what it's like to go out and knock on a mom's door in the middle of the night. It changes things for you. But I mean, I think especially in Chicago, we sort of cover crime like we cover the election. It's this constant churn of statistics and numbers, and it isn't always substantial. Then you have a guy like Trump.
It's a horse race.
It's scoreboard reporting. And then you have a guy like Trump who will use a global stage to talk about Chicago and talk about black communities as violent, as ghettos, across the board. But that's the dominant narrative. The newspapers in Chicago tell me that every day. So what does it look like to have equitable coverage? I mean, I think that involves being in the community, not just for a shooting.
Yeah, so I just want to, again, I want to press that just one more time, because I do think that's part of why we now suddenly feel like we're in the scariest possible moment without acknowledging how scary the world has already been. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that this isn't meaningful, that there weren't and are not clearly discernible differences, that I think the lesser of two evils was a bad way to frame this election, all of that. But I guess, let me put it a slightly different way, because I feel like I'm not getting there. When Joe Biden's son passed, tragically, but also, and no one should ever lose their child, but in the way that if any of us ever have to lose anyone, is the most human way. Surrounded by family, with time to say goodbye, in hospice care. Anyone who's done hospice, everyone in hospice they're extraordinary. They help you move through that transition. It doesn't mean you don't grieve, but if there is a good way to die young, it is the only way. And he had that available to him. And yet the country understood and believed that his grief was so enormous that he couldn't even be expected to run. But every one of these black women whose children were lost to them in vile, public ways that included no justice and were speedy, not slow deaths where you could say goodbye, but on the way home with Skittles and iced tea, were expected to become political activists the next day. And I just wonder if it's because we don't have any sense about humanity and mourning and black parenting and what the world already is, and if in fact media could, do better.
I just wanted to say something about that. I think that because of what the media says, that I work with those moms and those dads a lot, and they feel like they have to jump into the fray because they feel like they have to tell their own story about their child, that everyone wasn't a bad kid or not in a gang, that they were innocent victims. And I've spoken to many of them, and they want to be able to tell their story because they don't feel that the media tells their story. And the other thing is, which this is one difference I know I've made in Congress, that we only talk when you die with other people, Newtown, Aurora, Pulse, but we don't talk about the slow moving massacres, the people that die by themselves. We don't give them moments of silence, and that's why I don't stand up for the moments of silence, because we don't recognize the people that have died by themselves.
And right, at their own hands, suicide being the number one cause.
61%.
Yep. What should we be taking away?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we need people engaged, and we need people to know that people are engaged. And I think one of the things we see from this election is people get down and say our voice doesn't matter. I've been doing this for 6 years. When I started, it was a very, very lonely issue. People would run the other way. Now we have people all across our country that are getting engaged. Moms, dads, white, black, brown, doesn't matter what you look like or where you live, that are really getting engaged in this movement. So I don't think people should take this as fear. Take this as a time to say, you know what, we're standing up to help people in Congress, to help us in Illinois, to take action, because when you say 92% of Americans believes in something, make sure your voice is heard.
I sort of keep this short, but to your last question about the expectation of women to be activists the very next day, I think we don't have a complete picture of black women or black communities. There are so many things missing. And when it comes to journalism, I think that involves building relationships that are going to last, finding ways to allow people to tell their stories, find platforms in which they can do that on their own terms. I think that's important going forward in order to tell more full stories.
Thank you all so much for being here. Representative Robin Kelly, Colleen Daly, and Daryl Holliday. Thank you. So pretend there's a commercial break and someone is talking about how to clean earwax out, and it'll be just like cable news, right? Okay. We're gonna bring in 3 more important voices. I'm gonna do this a little bit differently. I'm gonna introduce you as I ask my first question to you. And it's because we were just talking about losing children to gun violence. Andrew Holmes is, of course, a community activist here in the city who did, in fact, lose his daughter to gun violence. What am I missing in the way I'm telling this story? What are all of us missing in how we're telling this story?
First and foremost, it's tough, when you lose a child, and it's tough when you look at another parent lose their children too, because you're always looking for that voice in the morning, and that voice is not there. So, but in your heart it's there. But each and every day, that's what keeps me going and motivates me to enhance the quality life of everybody and try to save a child, try to save an adult. So my path and my goal is just to try to reach out to many people as I can to help them, because no one wants to be in these shoes and lose their baby the way I lost mine.
Will you react for me about Tuesday night's election? I tried to suggest that maybe in communities where we know something about this kind of loss and danger, we might have some resources, either personal resources or community resources internally to help the rest of the country deal with their anguish in this moment. In other words, as is common, Black folks might have already been the miner's canary in this story and might already be able to say, here's how you respond. Is there something we should know as a country about what it means to have not just been vulnerable, but to have lost? I have 2 daughters. I don't know what people are made of, that you stand back up and go out and do the work. What do the rest of Americans need that Black folks already have in communities that have been vulnerable?
First and foremost, tough parents and tough prayer, but at the same time, when I was growing up, my mother was working, but my father wasn't. And we always sat around a table and we had dinner, we had breakfast, and that's what's missing inside the homes now. Everybody wants to point the finger here, mayor, governor. No, we have to get back to reality and pull our family back to the table. There's lots of kids don't eat meat at the table with their family now. They're eating all outside. They look for resources, but when the resources are here, in which they are in Chicago and in the state of Illinois now, in the Park District, you have resources there. Parents have to get up, take your children to the park, get them involved in them programs, and then they wonder why the resources are gone. Well, the parks are empty. And if they take and engage their children in the activities there and in the education process, then you get more and more resources. And that's a path that I'm doing now, block by block, with the Block Club coalitions, is to fill these parks back up because the grants and the money are there in the park.
Kofi. Just so you know, Kofi is the lead organizer here in the Black Lives Matter movement in Chicago, and is actually standing in for who you may have been I sensed right in that moment what is often a kind of intergenerational angst around this particular question of organizing. It's one that I had a conversation with Brittany Packnett, who I know there's other kinds of anxieties, but I had a conversation with Brittany about the work that Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black lives more broadly is often doing with and on behalf of, for example, the mothers of the movement. The mothers of the movement had been with Secretary Clinton from the beginning. Young people, younger activists, some never came along or came along much later. I think in part because this question of sort of where responsibility lies, how we engage these questions, what we do next, some of that is really generational. And generational in the sense that this movement, the movement for Black Lives, has thrown off of respectability politics, has said, actually, we don't think there's any particular way we have to behave in order to earn our equality. We just gonna ask for that right now, dressed exactly how we're dressed right now. As you look at this moment, what can that part of the movement for Black Lives teach all of the country about how to respond?
Well, I look at it more so around analysis, right? I look at it that it's not so much generational because I like how you uplifted your father's story and being a roommate with Stokely Carmichael, who we would know to be Kwame Ture. I think a lot of our politics are in line with movement historically, right? So you've always had a movement where young people have historically been at the head, and you've also had a movement historically where women have been at the head, right? It's just now we're at a space and time where women are finally getting the recognition that they deserve, right? Finally are being seen as the organizers, as the ones putting in the real effort in holding these governments, these systems accountable for our bodies, right? So I just think the only difference now is we are in a fortunate space where the political education can be more broadly spread out. So we're not looking for a figurehead. We're not looking for, single leadership, right? We consider ourselves a leaderful movement, right? So that means that...
I want you to say that again because people who may not know the movement for Black Lives may not know that important distinction. The rejection of the language of leaderless, which was the language of Occupy, leaderless movements. But instead, the movement for Black Lives says you are a...
leaderful movement, that's right.
Right, full of leaders, right? So we talk about the founder. It's not Alicia or Patrice or Opal. It's Alicia, Patrice, and Opal.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So we come from a situation where we're trying to live the models that we want to replace, right? So we're fighting back against white supremacy. We're fighting back against patriarchy. We're fighting back against heteronormative politics, right? So that means we have to also build ourselves out to be egalitarian, right? To be inclusive, right? We have to censor the most marginalized. But we're borrowing these ideas and these analyses from our elders, from our ancestors, and we're just carrying on with the tradition that we see. But it's also, also being a part of the time that we're in now, and the conditions and adjusting to that. So we always are trying to build out, but you have to remember too, this particular movement is only, going on 4 years, coming up in a while, right? So it's still growing. It's moving beyond, the limitations of protesting and marching, and, it's about organizing. So just to uplift, Kwame Ture again, right? This idea that we have to now be organized, that we're looking at policy now, that we have the Movement for Black Lives policy platform, right? That we're now organizing in community. We're not just about police accountability, although that's a big thing. We're moving beyond that. We're moving towards abolition work. We're being inspired by Angela Davis and other people that are prison abolitionists. And we're looking at what does a world look like without police? What does a world look like without prisons, right? And for those, who lack that imagination, that may seem far-fetched and they think anarchy and chaos, but the reality is we're just saying replace systems, right? We're not talking about people. We're not getting into this bad cop, good cop narrative, right? We're talking about systems that are inherently violent, that are inherently harmful. How do we replace those with systems that are more inclusive and loving and egalitarian?
Tamar, Tamar Manassa, who's founder and president of Mothers Against Senseless Killings. So we were talking a little bit about making the conversation that we're having about communities, particularly vulnerable communities, Black communities, broader, also deeper, more intense, more accurate to our lives. Tell me how the work that you do as a community organizer is part of that. Because we've talked a little bit about policy work, but also if you're going to do community organizing work, you got to do the whole person.
Well, first of all, let me just say, I really hate that I had to go behind these two because they are amazing.
You got it, girl.
First of all.
Yeah, we all right.
But
We gonna be all
secondly, I'm no community organizer. I'm a mother. I'm just somebody's mother.
That's not the same
all.
thing?
No. I once upon a time thought the two were pretty much the same. It's not. It's everything. I'm everything now. And I'm fortunate to have the view that I have because only from my perspective do I feel like I can actually do something to really make a real difference. And it's something that is so easy that any parent can do. The mother of two daughters, fathers, anybody can do this because we're more motivated to do it than anyone. We're parents. We're parents. And people ask often, aren't you afraid? Every night in the summer, I cook dinner on a street corner in Inglewood, every night. And I can go to a posh restaurant downtown, and I won't sit with my back to the door. But when I'm sitting on the corner of 75th and Stewart, I will sit out there and paint my toenails with my back to the street. Because that's how safe I feel. That's the environment that I've created. It is that family dinner that Andrew was talking about every single night. It's that building a family again. It's that feeling like a family. It's kids rejecting gangs and that activity because they do belong to a larger gang now. They belong to my gang. They belong to a family.
So I love what you just did there because you took this same language of family that it fits in our heads, right? I genuinely, not so much dinner at my house, but breakfast is, that's the time. My girls, one of them is 2, one of them is 14, but my husband, me, and the girls, breakfast, that is it. Even when I'm on the road, I try to FaceTime in, breakfast, right? Mm-hmm. So we get that sense. It makes sense to us. It reaches us. But then we also gotta be able to say, but hell, if you don't have a 2-parent household where there's plenty of food for breakfast every morning, which we know is a reality, we don't want those kids to be vulnerable. So what I love is that it fits with us. It makes sense that we need family, but you just grew the definition. You just increased that idea about what family could be.
That's where I came from. I came from one of those old Black families where I didn't have 2 parents, I had 12. I didn't have one mother, I had 7 of them. And I am a piece of all of those women and a piece of all of those men. I am all of those mothers and all of those fathers. And so when I'm on the block and I'm out there and he's been out there and so many people have been out there, those are mothers and fathers. Those kids have a 2-parent household. They have a family. So there are things, we can change things in ways that people never can imagine just by showing up. But what I've learned since I've been out there, and that's why this election was so important. It wasn't necessarily the national election I was paying so much attention to because I was much of the same mind that you were. If all politics are local to me, and if I can convince kids, if I can show them another way, if I can convince them, as the statistics show, to stop shooting each other, stop killing each other, if I can convince them to do that, if I can convince them to have hope and to look for something better and to believe that they can partake in the American dream, Somebody has to give them a job. I can't do that part. But you know what? Politicians can. Our elected officials can. So my thing became in this election, no. If you're not gonna give my babies jobs, because I can't have kids saying I want a job and they can't find one and then they end up in jail because they still had to survive. If you can't find them a job, I elect you to find them jobs, to help me finish my mission, to do your part, and you can't do it, you won't have your job. It's simple.
So Kofi, Tamar started doing this work for us. I want to give you one last word here on this, and then I'm going to give Mr. Holmes the very last word. But sometimes the things that we've heard here are put as alternatives. Either we need policy about guns, or we need some kind of community-based, right, hope, capacity, youth, or we need just economic development. So Kofi, talk to me, you did it in a broad way. Give me a few specifics on what the movement for Black Lives, still a young movement, is thinking about in terms of developing how those prongs aren't in competition with each other, but working together.
I mean, it's difficult, right? Because we think on a two-tiered kind of thing, right? We think about harm reduction. What's the immediacy of increasing the quality of life of Black people? What's the immediacy of preventing our deaths? So in that, right, we have to think along the lines of what reforms, what policy can we kind of get behind, right? We were here in Chicago, we were behind an ordinance called the Civilian Police Accountability Council, which basically means community control of the police, right? The model of policing now is still terrible, and we see a long history from when they murdered Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, all the way down to the John Burge torture victims, all the way up to the recent killings of all the people that we say their names for, right? So we wanted to for harm reduction, yes, you know, ultimately we want to abolish the current model of policing, but we want to have community accountability and community control of the police. So we were supporting that legislation going through. We're also supporting the brother William Callaway, who helped break the case for the Laquan McDonald thing. He's pushing a law right now called the Laquan Law, and it's a recall law. So if you feel as though your mayor, your city councilman is just not doing their job, like Samir just said, right, then we get 10% of that signatures to recall them out of office, and that makes the community have control over our legislative powers, right? So in the short term, we want to push legislations like that, like the Stephon Watts law. Stephon Watts was, he was dealing with autism, and the police came in and killed him in front of his father. So that law is going to make it mandatory where officers have training around dealing with people dealing with mental health care and different disabilities, right? So for the short term, we want to get behind law that empowers the community, empowers the people. But long term, we're grassroots. We're coming from the community. We don't see any of these governments as legitimate. I mean, that's our political position, right? So we're going to work what we can to reduce the harm happening to us, but ultimately, you know, we want power for the people.
Kofi Ademola, lead organizer for the Black Lives Matter here in Chicago. Tamar Manassa, founder and president of Mothers Against Senseless Killings. And Andrew Holmes, I'm going to give you just one last word. What would you have us to take away to make sure that we are thinking not only about our own daughters and sons, but thinking of all the community's children as our daughters and sons?
Well, just reach out and help your neighbors. Mainly, we need citizens across the United States to help their own family because they turn their back on their family. Even when you see your family members are on drugs, you want to even help them, and the kids are helping themselves. What we're personally doing, we're taking the young teenagers out of the environment that they're in because there's so many children out here that are out of school, so many of them that want to go to school, and I'm not saying nobody reached out to them, but we're reaching out to them, and what I'm doing is taking them out of the environment off the streets where they're selling drugs and I'm working with Lincoln Challenge to take them out the city, put them in that school, their military type school, and do counseling with them and get them to go into college or either into the service. We got to help them some type of way, because between the gun violence, to put an end to it, put an end to the drugs, we got a lot of drug addicts, teenagers out here, fentanyl and heroin. We're working block by block to find these children, and also in a $1 billion operation that's going on right here in this city. And it's not narcotics, and it's not a gang war, it's the human trafficking of our children.
Fantastic. Very good. Okay, so at this point, we are opening it up to all of you. I was only teasing that you can't give me a hard time about my talk. So all of these folks are here, I'm here, and we're going to open it up for a bit of Q&A.
Good evening, everybody. I am a member of MASK. While I was sitting here next to the Congresswoman, we talked about where the funds are going, where the scarce resources are going. In our community, more money is being spent on punishment than it is on prevention. MASK is an organization that we don't get government funding. And we have, I like that analogy, the speed analogy, because we've gone back to something old that's new. We sit out on the corners like she was raised. She came in with the street lights. Parents sit on the porch and we watched out for other people's kids. At one time we didn't have a phone, but before I got home, if I did something wrong, my mother, oh, Miss So-and-so said you did this or you did that. And tomorrow...
I hope they also sent the information if you did something good.
Oh, that too.
There you go. Good.
But Tamar can sit out on the corner and she could tell young men. And we know some of the guys that do some of the things that they do, and their pants are sagging. And she'll tell them, pull your pants up. And they tell her, I don't have a belt. And she bought about 20 knockoff belts. Oh, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to say knockoff?
If y'all haven't figured it out yet, this is tomorrow's mama up front. We got multiple generations of mama-ing going on. Yes, and you will get mama even on stage at the Chicago Humanities Festival. This is my point about what is the difference exactly between black mama-ing and community organizing. Yes.
Hi, my name is Nicole Johnson. I'm the Field and Outreach Manager with Chicago Votes. And what would that youth involvement look like, maybe rallying, canvassing, or organizing around issue-based to promote more voter engagement among that, 17 to 25? What could that look like here in Chicago, given your expertise and experience with the issues that we have?
So she's asking about increasing youth involvement and participation in American politics broadly, but you're asking quite specifically about the Chicago case and the idea that, I guess the early reporting is, I'm presuming that this is in part motivating it, the early reporting is that the millennial vote is down in this election over the past 2 election cycles, and given the racial diversity of the millennial population, that ought to have an important impact relative to national elections. Although I would tell you we have to have some, it's very much like the other chart around women's voting. It turns out white millennials actually still 55% gave their vote to Donald Trump. So it's not really true that the millennial vote was a Democratic vote. It's once again primarily along the lines of white versus non-white. But that said, you asked a broad question about increasing overall participation.
I try to go to as many schools as possible, but interestingly enough, I did say that my district is 2/3 out of Chicago, that it's all the suburban schools that I get invited to talk about my job, what I do, the opportunity to get younger people involved and to remind people that you didn't have to be 18 to register as long as you were going to be 18 by November 4th. So that's where some of the base comes from. Also, it would have to be after church in a lot of religious institutions, but trying to talk to younger people there through fraternities and sororities. A lot of them have younger, little sister, little brother organizations, even though they can't themselves be partisan, but they can at least get people politically active. I always tell young people to volunteer for a campaign or a cause, something that they believe in so that they could get a taste of what it's like.
I just want to add a couple of quick things on this that we know, because it's it's my whole life now. Just like there are laws and policies that can make us relatively more safe relative to guns and gun violence, we also can extend the electorate through a variety of laws and policies, especially with young people, things like automatic voter registration at 18. So you literally have to opt out of being a registered voter as opposed to having to opt in. In the state of North Carolina, when we were more progressive on our voting, just to keep that real understated, passed the laws where you could pre-register at 17, which is not quite the same as automatic registration, but we did see much higher participation when you have registration of 17-year-olds, right, who are pre-registering for it. We know also that if you have same-day registration, one-stop registration like we now have in North Carolina, once the Supreme Court ruled most recently, we know that will dramatically increase young people's participation, because if they can go register and vote on the same day and don't have to do it twice, right, 2 different acts. And this is also really important when we think about lawmakers who used kind of DMV, motor voter laws were important for increasing registration, but they also are presumptive about the suburbs, right, because everybody gets a driver's license, right? But often young people living in cities are not going to learn to drive, or certainly not learn to drive right away, right, because they won't need to. And so motor voter increased voter registration, but in suburbs, exurbs, and rural areas, not so much, right, in cities, which means we need different things here. But then I'm going to say 2 other things. I think it is extremely important that we recognize, again, if I were to put up some other maps for you, that there really aren't any blue states anywhere in the country, right? There's only blue cities, and they're just either big enough to carry the state or not. So let me just say, I'm bluer than I am red, right? 99% of the time, but I voted for multiple Republicans in my life for a variety of reasons, sometimes because they're running unopposed, and so I ain't gonna not vote. County commissioner and stuff. I live in the South, it happens. I also voted for Joseph Gow from New Orleans, which is another story, but anyway. But in part because I come from a family where, on my father's side, where Black folks from the Jim Crow South, he wasn't Kwame Ture's roommate, though. He was Stokely's roommate, because that's who he was in college, and it's a different dude in a certain kind of way. So that's my dad's side, but my mom's side are white folks. And like white folks. My mom is the 4th of 5 children from a Latter-day Saints family who, pushed handcarts across the American West. She grew up in Spokane, Washington. She graduated from Brigham Young University. So many of my aunts and uncles are, Tea Party types out west. Yeah, and I love them, and I adore them, and they're my family. And, they sent me Christmas gifts as a kid, and for me, what that has always meant is I can't do the basket of deplorables bowl. Like, I can think that your candidate is deplorable while still acknowledging that many of the people who support those candidates are supporting them for a wide variety of reasons. Sometimes because they're single issue voters, sometimes, right? our inability as Americans to even imagine the humanity of people on the other side of the aisle is extreme, and it is just as bad on the left. I mean, it's something. Like, I've been running a bipartisan program all year, so I take selfies with all my kids, all of them. And every time I put up a picture of myself with some of my white boys with their Trump hat, the amount of trolling ass hate that I get behind it. And I'm thinking, well, who would you like them to be hanging out with? Because while y'all are trolling the crap out of me, these 20-year-old white boys who voted for Trump are nonetheless also spent the year with me. And it wasn't my goal to change their vote. My goal was to engage with them, for me to learn something from them, for them to learn something from me, and hopefully, as they become the future of the Republican Party, the future of the Republican Party will have in it people who were students of Melissa. I like that. I'm down for that. I'm down for MHP helping to train the future of the Republican Party. Because if I'm only training the future of the Democratic Party, I am caught in a crazy, and I don't have you met Democrats? So one of the things I really think we have to do as we start talking about youth engagement, when we go beyond the vote, is serious, hard, uncomfortable, not fun, very difficult to sustain. Because let me tell you, for all the work that we did, it all fell apart Tuesday, and I'm trying to figure out how to put it back with spit and glue, and because the pain. But only young people are going to be able to actively engage each other across these lines, not ever giving up where you stand, but nonetheless recognizing that your opponents are not inhuman. I mean, I don't know how we're gonna not do that. And so I would prefer that we figure out how to start doing some organizing that engages that as well.
I just wanted to say, for 20 years, or it'll be 20 years this year in the South Suburbs, we had something called the Diversity Dinners that we started. And we found 50 homes, and they took in 10 people that they didn't know across race, creed, color, sex, whatever. So I brought that idea to Congress. And for the 3 years I've been in Congress, I've hosted diversity dinners for congressional members. And I found a Republican, Martha Roby, from Alabama, conservative. She hosted the dinners with me, and we've gotten 40 to 50 plus Congress people from both sides. And all we do is sit down, break bread together, get to know each other as people. And I know you're not gonna believe this, but we do get along better than people think. We really, really do. But it's just that we just come from it in a different way. And some things that they do on the other side, I can't even rationalize it. It's like, really, you don't, like the gun thing. I don't want your gun. I'm not against guns, but it's ridiculous what's going on. And we do talk about it. So it's not that we're animals in a cage fighting each other or anything like that. It may seem like it. I don't know how it's going to be on Tuesday, but when I go back,
we're going to give people some more room to have some pain.
But we do get along, and the sad part about it is, there's some people that lost on the other side that are not going to come back. We take the low-hanging fruit from each other. So the moderate Republicans are the ones that lose, or the blue dog Democrats. And so you don't want one side way over there and one side on the other side, because we'll never get anything done, as you guys know already. So, but we do get along better. It's just more getting bills called to the floor. Whether, the immigration bill was bipartisan, but the top just wouldn't call it to the floor.
Join me in thanking my extraordinary guests. Thank you all. Y'all are about to hear from FM Supreme. Now, you might know her as Jessica. She's an extraordinary activist here in Chicago, but she does not keep her activism just here in Chicago. She is, I think, through her music, through her activism, through her work, working to alter the very world that we are now facing. It is my pleasure to introduce to you FM Supreme.
Good evening, good evening. Make some noise for Dr. Melissa Harris Perry. I love her so much. I really love Dr. Harris Perry, like for real, for real. This piece is called Sirens. Riding through the city and I'm ducking city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops. Stand out the way cause they got my city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked. It's hard to feel safe when you're born at the bottom. No one seems to care your whole life being the problem. Voted for Obama, but I'm feeling like a Sada. Ready to flee private jet to Cuba. Blacks killing blacks, capitalism is the ruler. The good die young and the great die sooner. Civil rights was 12, kid for being a kid, for not being taught to black kids, not kids to the system. They don't see our children as victims, nor innocent. It's ridiculous, we're not equal. My people, the blue water silence is our nation divided. I can see the Lord every time I close my eyes. I can see the light on surrounded by the violence. Killing cops, killing kids, playing at the park. I am a voice that Tupac sparked. The ghost of Tasha bad orange juice. Store clerk shot her with no excuse. She died in cold blood and spilled juice. No justice was served, judge piss poor. It should be motivation to be fighting for. Middle fingers against black carnivores. They gave us integration, but we really need more. I got mad, now I gotta get yours. It's the reason our people are piss poor. Ask yourself, who are you account for? Hope it's just more than your family, cause family racism don't discriminate. Regardless of wealth, your talent, the class, the fancy, and release them and educate. Still judge for being your race. Don't believe me? Let's get gay. Wax Martin King, 1968, who acts dark and white, like always. Muhammad Ali, 1967, didn't know the Vietnam against his religion. When we all gonna stand up and stop sinning and shout to God, but the world see a black villain. Broken city in repair, but the Lord's healing. Only Lord willing. Ran through the city and I'm ducking city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops. Stand out the way cause they got my city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked. I said I'm running through the city and I'm ducking city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops. They the biggest gang and they got my city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked. No justice, no peace, so abolish police. Not if the police don't want blood on my sheets or blood on my hands, don't open the door. Betty Jones shot, dead to the flow. Whoa, whoa, the rigament roll, you know how it goes. They locking the load, thinking before they pulling the trigger. All lives matter, set black niggas. Tell me how you figure they some undercover killers. President Nixon was the biggest drug dealer. War on drugs was a war on us. Ronald Reagan, less incarceration, institutionalized, so now we need that education to understand what happens to our generation. Wasn't planned by the government administration, then we medicated, was meditated, and we meditated habits, it's hard to break it. Pharmaceuticals, medicals, been addicted. Only difference the risk getting with prescription out of House, Congress, and the Senate came to consensus to give double digits. And life sentences, drug sentences, the violence sentences. That's why I'm running through the city and I'm ducking city cops, city cops, city cops, city cops. City cops, city cops, stand out the way cause they got my city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked, city locked. I said I'm running the city and I'm ducking city cops, city cops, city cops, Alicia Garza said that we're not anti-cops. We're not anti-police. We're anti-getting killed in these streets. My name is Jessica D, also known as FM Supreme, Wayne Barrett on the guitar. Thank you so much to Dr. Melissa Harris Perry, so much.
We have a responsibility to build levees of justice against the flood of inequality that is coming. You have a responsibility to rebuild the levees of justice.